The seat belt light flickered on, casting a warm amber glow across the cabin. The hum of the engines filled the air with a soft rhythm, the kind that made people close their eyes and drift away. Passengers settled in, scrolling through their phones, opening books, and tucking blankets around their laps. Among them sat a woman in her late 30s, seat 13F, by the window. Her hair was tied in a loose knot, aviator sunglasses resting atop her head. She wore simple jeans, a gray hoodie, and a calm expression. Nothing about her stood out, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Outside, the clouds rolled past in soft waves. The captain's voice came through the intercom, steady but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may experience a bit of turbulence ahead. Please remain seated." The passengers barely reacted, but the woman in 13F looked up, eyes narrowing just slightly. Years of instinct told her something was wrong. She glanced through the glass, watching the sky with quiet focus. The air was calm, but her gut told a different story. Her mind shifted back into old habits, her senses alert. Somewhere deep inside, the soldier she tried to leave behind began to wake again. 15 minutes later, it happened. The seatbelt sign blinked again. Then came the faint, distant roar of engines, too powerful, too sharp to belong to a commercial airliner. A few passengers looked out the windows, confused. Gasps filled the cabin. Two dark figures cut through the clouds like shadows, F-22 Raptors, sleek and menacing. Their presence silenced the aircraft. A child whispered, "Mom, look, fighter jets." A businessman frowned, muttering, "That can't be good." The captain's voice came back, quieter now. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We have some unexpected company." The woman in 13F didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the Raptors as they drew closer, aligning perfectly with the plane's wings. Then, faint through the cabin hum, she caught a transmission over the intercom, barely audible but unmistakable to her trained ear. "Tower, confirm passenger manifest. Is Falcon 1 on board?" Her heart stopped for a beat. Falcon 1, a name buried years ago. Her jaw tightened, and for the first time in years, the soldier within her resurfaced. She looked out at the Raptors, her expression unreadable. Somewhere in those cockpits, someone still remembered. The radio chatter began again, almost like a ghost of her past whispering through the air. "Raptor, lead to civilian flight 207. Confirm Falcon 1 in seat 13F." The captain hesitated. "Affirmative," he finally said, his voice uneasy. "She's here." The woman closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. The Raptors slowed, flying in perfect formation beside them. Then, in an unexpected gesture, both pilots raised their gloved hands and saluted. It was subtle, deliberate, and deeply personal. The gesture wasn't for the flight. It was for her. Passengers turned, whispering, craning their necks towards seat 13F. Cameras lifted. Confusion filled the air. She didn't flinch. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Private, controlled, almost sad. The man seated beside her leaned in, whispering, "Who are you?" She turned her gaze forward. "Not yet," she said softly. He didn't ask again. The hum of the engines continued, but the air inside the cabin had changed. The woman who once lived in shadows had been found again, thousands of feet above the clouds. Hours earlier, she had moved through the airport like a ghost. A simple boarding pass. No check bag. No laptop. The name on the ticket, E. Carter. Forgettable, harmless. She kept her head down, her steps calm, her presence small. Years in service had taught her that invisibility was a skill. The truth was, she hadn't flown commercial in years. But this flight wasn't about her. It was about a promise. A quiet one she'd made to a fallen friend. A pilot she once saved in. A battle nobody talked about. He was gone now, and she was heading to his hometown for a memorial no one outside their world would ever attend. She had expected anonymity. But when the Raptors appeared, she realized the Air Force hadn't forgotten. Somewhere, someone had seen her name, remembered the legend behind Falcon 1, and called in the sky's guardians to honor her without a word. She didn't need applause, just silence and respect. Back in the present, the captain's voice broke through again, steadier now. We've been granted clearance to proceed with escort. For 30 long minutes, the F-22s flew alongside the commercial jet, protective, respectful, silent. Passengers whispered wild theories. Yeah, military official, royalty, but none of them could imagine the truth. The woman in 13F had lived through missions no one would ever know about. She'd flown into storms of fire to rescue others. She defied orders to save lives. She'd been both hero and ghost. Now she sat, quietly, watching the Raptors keep pace, their presence both tribute and farewell. When the jets finally banked away, wings dipping in synchronized salute, something in her chest loosened. She exhaled, a breath years in the making. The passengers clapped softly, unsure why. She just smiled faintly, eyes glistening under the fading sun. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel seen. As the plane began its descent, she reached into her small leather bag and pulled out a folded photograph. The edges were worn from years of travel. 4 pilots stood shoulder to shoulder on a sun-baked runway, smiling, proud, fearless. She was the 4th, helmet under her arm, call. Signed, Falcon 1, stenciled above her name. That photo had been taken the morning of a mission. That changed everything. When it went wrong, she had flown into enemy territory to rescue 2 downed pilots. She'd taken hits, limped back home with smoke pouring from her jet, landing on fumes and sheer will. That day, she earned the respect of everyone who ever wore wings. But she never spoke of it again. The world moved on. She faded into anonymity. Until today, when the sky itself remembered her name. When Flight 207 finally landed, word had already spread. The ground crew lined the tarmac in quai formation. Some stood at attention. Others placed hands over their hearts. As the passengers disembarked, eyes followed her, uncertain yet reverent. At the end of the jet bridge, 2 young Air Force officers waited. One stepped forward, saluting crisply. "Ma'am, it's an honor," he said softly. "My father flew with you. You saved his life." She returned the salute. Sharp, disciplined, humble. "He saved mine too," she replied. Then, without another word, she walked away, disappearing into the terminal crowd. No press, no cameras, just a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any medal ever could. That night, in a small town surrounded by fields and open sky, she stood at the edge of a candlelit memorial. The sunset bled across the horizon in streaks of orange and gold. Dozens of small flames flickered against the dark, each one representing a name, a story, a life once lived at the speed of sound. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Around her, the veterans who knew her. Call signs stood silently, heads bowed. To them, she wasn't E. Carter. She was Falcon 1, the pilot, who defied orders to save her brothers in arms. As the last light faded, she heard it, a distant rumble, faint but familiar. Jet engines, echoing across the night sky. She looked up, a small smile touching her lips. The Raptors were out there, somewhere, still watching over her. She whispered into the wind, "Mission complete." And for the first time in years, she felt at peace.